I was a surgical technologist in labor and delivery for about 10 years. I worked for a not-for-profit Catholic hospital for almost 4 years out of that 10. When I first started in the department, 2 techs that had already worked there for a very long time. We'll call them M and J, and myself, Kay, told me stories about Sister Mary Margaret, who was a surgery tech, back when the hospital was still ran by nuns. Needless to say, Sister Mary Margaret was very much by the book and left little room for her co-workers' errors. Jay knew about Sister Mary Margaret, but M had worked there so long, she'd actually worked with the nun. M began to tell tales about instances when she'd heard Sister Mary Margaret in the OR suite long after she'd passed away and up to the current time frame. Being a born skeptic, I thought M and J were just hazing the new girl. I wasn't buying a bit of their nonsense. Well, fast forward to when I'm off of orientation and working my 12-hour night shifts. I'd be in the back setting up the OR suite or stocking supplies, and I could hear the shuffle of shoe covers. Just as high heels make the clack-clack sound, there is a very distinct sound shoe covers make when they shuffle along the hospital floor. I just sleuthed it out and figured M and or J put one of the night shift nurses up to pranking me just to see if I'd fall for it. Well, I just had to hop out there, catch them in the act, and let them know they weren't fooling anybody. So, I popped out into the hallway, ready to scare the scrub pants off of whomever was pranking me, but when I jumped out into the hallway, no one was there. There was no movement in the hallway, swinging of the doors, chatter on the intercoms, nothing. Needless to say, I was really perplexed. So, that first incident just kind of got a shrug from me and I went on working. As time passed, these incidents became more and more frequent. We had more new employees and M and J were training them. M and her new orientee had an incident where sterile supplies were on the OR bed and a bulb syringe floated from the top of the supply pile at a 90-degree angle for about a minute, and then just dropped to the floor. I really began believing them when they relayed that story to me during report. I could tell they were both honestly shaken up by the ordeal, and I actually felt pretty bad for them. They were scared. Trust me, these two were not actresses. There was no way they could have given such an Oscar-worthy performance. I continued having my own encounters with shuffling shoe covers, unintelligible whispering, all of the hallmarks of a typical haunting. Some of my tech co-workers continued reporting the same kind of activity. None of the activity was as egregious as what M and her orientee experienced with the floating bulb syringe in midair. When this all stopped being amusing to me, when I went to the OR suite at about 2:30, 3 a.m. to stock linens and sterile water and saline into the warmer. I'd done this 100 times, it wasn't anything new. For those of you not familiar with hospital warmers, they are the equivalent to leaving the hospital and going straight to Narnia. These miraculous inventions are what makes your hospital blankets so nice and toasty. We also put sterile water and saline in the top portion of the warmer to heat up liquids used externally so the patient doesn't get hypothermic. To give you a visual, it literally looks like an industrial-sized stainless steel refrigerator. It performs in the same way, except instead of making everything cold, it warms everything up. Thus, the hospital warmer. I had taken the linen cart and some water and saline bottles with me to stock up everything. I left the cart in the hallway outside of our 2 surgical suites. The warmer was in between both OR suites in a little cubby beside our crash cart. As you very well know, hospitals are known for migraine-inducing bright light. This was one of a few things that I disliked about working in a hospital. Whenever I was able, I'd spare the blinding fluorescent lights as much as possible. So, I proceeded to stock the warmer without turning lights on to spare myself the glare whenever I could. The OR suites were darkened and shadowy, but I could easily see to get around. I'm sure everyone familiar with refrigerator freezers already is aware that the refrigerator part is pretty cold and the freezer part is, obviously, frozen cold. The warmers at a hospital basically work on the same premise. The refrigerator part warms the blankets while the freezer part makes the external water and saline bottles really toasty. That's exactly what we want. So I open the refrigerator part and expect to be hit in the face with some pretty arid heat. It was cold. Wait, what? Is it broken? It has to be. There's no way this warmer could be this cold. Something is not right. Then, I also checked the freezer portion, which should have been even hotter. It was actually colder. Nope, this isn't right. It was not normal for this warmer to be this cold. The fans were blowing warm air, but it just wasn't warming anything up. It was then that I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I'd never felt that way at the job previously. I turned around and looked up to see a black mist smoke towards the top of the ceiling. At first, I thought maybe some part of the warmer's electric had fizzled out, and this was the beginning of a fire. The problem was, the black mist smoke was on the ceiling and in the opposite corner of the warmer. I looked at the warmer's connections, and everything was as it was supposed to be. There was nothing wrong with the warmer. There was something in that OR suite cubby that was not friendly and rather malevolent. I knew it wasn't Sister Mary Margaret. She'd never do anything menacing. I can't explain how, but I knew not only that it wasn't her, I also knew she wasn't there to help protect me from whatever this was. It was slowly seeping down from the corner of the ceiling towards myself and the warmer. I did what seemed to be the most sensible thing, and I began reciting the Lord's Prayer. It paused full stop. As I continued, it literally looked like a film being played in reverse. It slinked back to the corner it came from. As soon as it was just about gone, I turned to hustle out of that little cubby area and back to the hallway. I happened to notice when I turned around to face the warmer, it was back to its normally toasty temperature. I didn't ruminate on it long. I just booked it out of the OR suite to the hallway and back to the nurse's station. Around 6 months ago, my grandpa had passed away due to cancer. Me and him were that close, but it hit my family really hard. He had died in my grandma's house in the guest room in his sleep while he was taking a nap, which is the room me and my sisters usually always stay in, when we spend the night or just visit my grandma in general. Anyways, about a month after his passing, we decided to go and spend the night with my grandma. I felt bad. Not to mention she had lost her mom, dad, brother, and now her husband in the 3 years, so yeah, she could really use our company. But we didn't want to rush into visiting her. She needed time to grieve. So anyways, we went to visit her a month after my grandpa's passing. She was so cheerful, but you could tell she was faking it. But I didn't want to say anything because she was trying to stay strong for us. Me and my sisters usually did all our usual activities with our grandma. We watched movies, cooked meals, dessert. We had fun, but it was time for bed. It was around 11 p.m. when my grandma had said she was getting a bit tired, so we headed off to sleep. Mind you that I didn't know he had died in the same room me and my sister slept in till after this incident happened. Anyways, back to the story. I remember my sister was asleep next to me. I was still awake, just chilling on my phone. After about 30 minutes, I was deep asleep. I remember the dream I had. My grandpa had visited me. He was just talking to me, saying how he hopes that our family knows that he's okay, and wanted me to know he loved me even though we weren't close. I woke up crying just because I was so happy. We've never had a conversation like that before. It was really heartwarming, even though it was just a dream. After that dream, I couldn't fall back to sleep after a couple of hours. I was just so in shock and couldn't wait to tell my grandma in the morning that Grandpa was okay. I was starting to feel tired after about an hour and a half of staying awake, and all of a sudden I heard 3 knocks. I kid you not, I was so freaked out I hid under the covers as a 16-year-old girl. I didn't know whether or not to wake up my sister and tell her what just happened, but I knew she would get mad, so I left her alone. I stayed under my covers for a while, then it got really hot, so I had to take them off. I was still horrified. I was questioning whether it was just my imagination or not. I was so horrified I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to get up from the bed, but I had to use the restroom like really bad. I have the smallest bladder ever. But anyways, I built up the courage to go across the hall to use the restroom. I walked to the bathroom with my eyes closed just because I'm a scaredy cat and didn't want to see any or anything in the hallway. So I make it to the bathroom, turn on my light, and feel so relieved to see some light in the darkened house. At this point, I'm so awake, there was no way I was going back after that. Anyways, I used the restroom, washed my hands, and as I walk out of the bathroom, I closed my eyes to try to find the guest room. The absolute scariest thing I could ever imagine happened. As I tried to touch the walls to find the room again in the pitch black darkness, I kid you not, I felt like I touched a man's chest, and I'm assuming he was wearing some sort of button-up shirt just because I could feel the fabric and buttons. You know when someone tells you to feel their heartbeat, so you put your hand on their chest to see. It's exactly what it felt like, except there was no heartbeat, and it was a male's chest. I know this sounds, but man, let me tell you. I was so in shock I just froze, keeping my hand on the person's chest with my eyes closed for about 30 seconds. I felt like crying, and that's exactly what I did. I was just terrified and I felt like I couldn't move. But something was telling me to man up and build up the courage and to open my eyes. I opened my eyes very, very slowly, and when I opened them, nothing was there, and the feeling of the man's chest went away. So at this point I was about to shit myself. I was absolutely terrified. I ran back in the room, and I guess my sister had heard me crying or something, because she was awake and looking at me confused. I told her everything that happened, and she looked a bit terrified as well. It's rare to see her like that because she's considered the buff one in the family. She decided to stay awake with me till my grandma awoke. It wasn't too bad, it was about 6 a.m. and she would probably be awake within the next 2 hours. We spent the time just watching TV, crack jokes with each other. We were still terrified and were debating if we should tell our grandma. I don't know. I just felt like we shouldn't startle her since she lived alone. But we decided it was best to tell her just so she knew that Grandpa still wanders around the house. Anyways, around 8:30 a.m., my grandma woke up and said good morning to us and said she would go get us tacos from a nearby restaurant. I said that I would go with her just to keep her company and to tell her about what happened the previous night. When we picked up the food, I decided it was time to tell her. I told her about the dream first, and that was when she told me that Grandpa had died in the same room that I slept in last night. I was a bit weirded out, but felt a little more relieved just because I know it was my grandpa and nothing else. I told her I heard the knocks, and she said it wasn't nothing new to her. I asked her what she meant, and she said that she always hears those at night. I was in complete shock how she doesn't shit her pants every time she hears that. She also told me that she hears his boots stomping on the wooden hallway just like he used to, and told me something that made me smile. Since my grandpa had died of cancer during his final days, he had told my grandma that when she's sitting on her bed sometime soon, he will kinda yank her leg softly, as a sign that he made it to heaven. And she said that's exactly what happened to her. I was so heartfelt and gave her a hug when we got out of the car. I told her when we got inside that I felt a man's chest when I was trying to find my way back to the room the previous night. I told her I didn't feel a heartbeat, but I felt a buttoned-up shirt. My grandma asked me what color it was, but I said it was too dark to tell. She took me to her room and opened the closet. I was a bit confused as to what she was doing, but I just went along with it. She was looking for something in the closet, and after about a minute of searching for something, she pulled out a box, and inside was a pair of boots, a buttoned-up shirt, and pants. My jaw dropped as she told me that this was the outfit he passed away in. I asked her if I could feel the shirt, and I immediately recognized it from the night before. That was the same shirt I felt on the man's chest the night before. I honestly didn't know what to think. My mind went blank and I was speechless. We both sat on her bed and talked about her favorite moments with him. Some tears were shed, but they were all happy tears. I definitely felt his presence in the room with us. I was so happy to see him again and automatically felt guilty for not speaking to him enough when he was alive. I feel so happy when I think about that night, just because I feel like he knew I felt bad about not speaking to him enough. And seeing him that night was just him reassuring me that everything was fine where he was. It was the summer of 2007. Life was good. I had a pretty normal teenage life. I had a few friends my age who lived in the same neighborhood as me, and we would do a lot of outdoor activities like hiking, mountain biking, and fishing. We lived just north of the Ozark Mountains in a nice little town in Arkansas. My father had worked very hard to give us all a good life. He came from a poor family and joined the military at 18 to better his future, and it paid off. He got a good job working on airplanes, and we moved to the country. My parents got a steal on a really nice old house in the village. It was a nice little community built into the woods, which had golf courses, private lakes and trails, and its own shopping center with a harps and a couple of restaurants. We were a happy, normal, middle-class family. That is, until that thing showed up and ruined our lives. There were a lot of local legends about the natives that used to inhabit the area. Supposedly, our entire community was built on top of sacred land. I used to walk the trails near my house a lot, and you could find cliffs and overhangs with Indian paintings on the walls and remnants of their civilization. I always felt bad about how they were driven from their homes by my ancestors, but I was still grateful for my home and wonderful life. The kids at school would often scare each other by telling tales of shamans summoning skinwalkers and rakes, and that to this day they still haunt the woods at night, looking for a midnight snack. I always laughed it off. Ghosts and monsters aren't real. They're just made-up stories to scare kids. I always thought the ghost hunter shows were ridiculous. You wouldn't hear or see anything on camera, but the people in the show would jump at a creek in the night, and suspenseful music would play while the camera focused on empty darkness. Those shows can be fun for the imagination, but the reality of paranormal entities is much more terrifying. They can tear apart families and bring your whole world crashing down. I would learn this dark reality one summer night. The air was cool. I had my window open and could hear the wind flowing through the leaves. The cicadas reverberating through the midnight woods put me in a sleepy trance. I relaxed and drifted off to sleep. In such a peaceful place, I was completely safe. I always felt one with the woods. It really is beautiful here. Cradled in the sounds of nature, I drifted deep into sleep. Then, a wave of panic. I feel every hair stand up. Chills down my spine. I feel the eyes of someone on me. I can feel their sinister intent. Every fiber in me is telling me to run. There is something here that wants to kill me. No, worse, it wants to own me, to see me suffer. It has been watching me. For a long time. I have been chosen. I can't breathe. Help me. Help me! I scream. Mom! I hear laughter. Not human. Not a physical voice. Multiple voices of all octaves laughing at once. I can't open my eyes, I can't breathe or talk, but I see its eyes. Blue bloodshot bulging eyes. Huge pupils. Red is filling my mind. I feel pressure. My entire body is vibrating and I feel like I'm going to explode. I gasp as I fully awaken. But as I open my eyes, I freeze. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Through my open door, I can see something laying on our living room couch. It's clearly visible, but clearly not a person. It's like a shadow, but flowing. The moonlight illuminates its face, a skull with a sinister smile. It has those same eyes from my dream. Huge, bulging, wide-open eyes. Crystal blue pupils. It's staring at me, smiling. It's awkwardly sprawled out on the couch, and its shadowy body, like a translucent but pitch-black cloak, flows as if underwater. I'm getting chills just typing this, and I want to be clear that this is not a fictional story. This really happened. I was so scared I was frozen. I felt electricity going up and down my spine, through my brain. My eyes were wide and watering. My mouth hung open. It stared into my eyes, into my mind for what felt like hours. It then quickly shifted out of sight. It darted down the couch and into the shadows. Adrenaline hit me and I ran into my parents' room. I burst open the door panting and covered in sweat. My parents were at first annoyed, and it was the typical thing parents do when something like this happens. But as I described every detail about my encounter, and when they saw how terrified I was, I started to see a look of unease and fear in my father's eyes. He was scared. He believed me. My father, being a devout Christian, believed in demons, and he was convinced I had just been tormented, and that I was in danger. He was very serious, and I could see that he was disturbed by what had just happened. He woke up my little sister, and the whole family gathered in the living room. I wish my dad had never done what he did next. He got out his Bible and turned the pages to a verse. I don't quite remember the actual verse, but it was something about casting out demons. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave my family alone, he yelled angrily, cursing the demon. If you want one of us, take me. Leave my family alone. We sat in the living room talking well into the night, and after a while we were all tired and went back to bed. I couldn't sleep though. I couldn't forget those eyes, its evil smile, the way it moved. It was disturbing. Fast forward a few months and things were normal. Me and my sister went back to school, and for the most part I had forgotten all about the demon. I even convinced myself it was a bad dream or even sleep paralysis. even though that was the only time sleep paralysis had ever happened to me. I went on with my life, until we got the worst news I had ever heard to this day. My dad was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer, and it had spread. He was dying. We were devastated. I hugged my father and cried all day that day. I couldn't believe I was going to lose my dad. He was always so strong and seemed very healthy. The weird thing is, and the doctors were also puzzled, his cancer was usually only found in teenagers. It was a cancer that almost 100% of the time was only found in boys in their early teens. This shocked me and made me feel guilty. The whole experience of the demon became prominent in my mind, and I remembered my father's words to the demon. I think it had its eye on me, but went after my dad instead. I wish it had taken me, though. My family would be much better off today if it had. My father remained positive through his sickness. He went to chemotherapy sessions, started eating healthier, and worked out as much as he could. With his bald head and amputated leg, people would often come up to him and thank him for his service. He always laughed and said thank you because he was a veteran, however contrary to what people thought his condition was much worse than if he had stepped on an IED. He lived for 3 more years even though the doctors said he had less than a year to live. He always stayed happy and positive, more for our sake than his own. But toward the end he started to slowly deteriorate. It was awful. I couldn't do anything to help him. The man I looked up to, who protected us, who I always saw as invincible, was crumbling before me. He lost all his weight and started sleeping on the couch to not disturb my mom. He was so sick. He suffered so much. I would hear his death rattles and moans and want nothing more than to help him in any way I could. Something that disturbs me so much to this day is that I started to realize something. He more and more resembled the demon. He was getting so thin he looked like a skeleton, and he had very blue eyes. Sometimes he would just look at me from the couch and I would get chills. The demon had been mocking me, imitating what he would do to my father while viciously smiling. As if it was funny. This enrages me. How can something be so vile, so purely evil? My poor father soon died and left us a broken family. My mother fell into a deep depression. I looked after my little sister, tried to be the best father figure I could be, even though I was a poor substitute. We fell behind on the bills and the bank foreclosed our house. We lost everything. The next handful of years were a struggle, but now I'm an adult and have gotten some sort of a stable life. I recently figured out why my father was so shaken that night and didn't just blow it off as a bad dream. I visited my sister recently, and we started talking about ghosts and the paranormal. I asked if she had ever seen anything like that, and she hesitated for a second, but then told me. And what she said gave me the chills. She was very young the night I saw the demon, and had largely forgotten that night. But she told me she used to see a shadowy man standing at the end of her bed. He had a skull for a face. Demons are real. It was a nice sunny day at my grandparents' house. They live in a nice neighborhood, maybe a Karen or two, but overall very nice. One of my favorite parts about visiting my grandparents' house was hanging out with my grandpa's, he is my step-grandpa, daughter, which we will call Alexis, who is my age. We'd play outside all day, and at night stay up till 4 a.m. playing Left 4 Dead and watching The Haunting Hour. Anyways, that morning, Alexis and I had woken up and gone outside to hang out in this clubhouse we had. We had done a bunch of cool activities like swinging on a rope and playing in sand. We got to a point where we wanted to play Truth or Dare. It started off basic, jump off the roof and stuff like that. At one point it was my turn. I asked Truth or Dare and Alexis chose Dare. I say, stay in the haunted house by yourself for 20 minutes. This haunted house was well known around the neighborhood. This house was right next to my grandma's house, and right next to that house was this girl's house, which we will call her Brooke. I had learned about this house from Brooke. It had been long abandoned by an old dude who moved away. Brooke would always tease about dead people in the bathroom or ghosts in the closed doors. There were also hundreds of groundhog holes in the backyard, but nowhere else. One night, Brooke, Alexis, and I were out walking. It was probably midnight. We are walking on the sidewalk in front of the haunted house. Brooke points out a tall, dark figure standing by the house. Alexis seems to see it too. I looked in their eyes. They were about to cry. They bolted to my grandparents' house. Being a guy, I tried to be brave. I looked for a few minutes, didn't see anything. I walked back to my grandparents' house to find them bawling their eyes out. That gave me some chills. Back to the truth or dare. Alexis had offered me a deal that she would go in only if I came with her. I said sure, but we would have to ask my grandpa. Grandma was at work. We went in to ask our grandpa, who was playing Hitman Blood Money. He said go for it. We walked over to the house and the door was surprisingly unlocked. We entered to be greeted with a terrible smell. There was still furniture, but plants were growing out of the sink and stuff like that. As we explored the kitchen and living room, I asked Alexis if she wanted to go explore the back rooms. She said sure. Even though at that time I didn't really believe in ghosts, I still took Brooke's advice of not going in closed doors. There was only one of 5 doors open, so we went into that room. It was a kid's bedroom. We never knew of a kid living here. The bed was still there and books were scattered all over the floor. Alexis was searching through the books and I was looking at a Dora the Explorer book. Alexis then saw a Bible before she touched it. I grabbed it, wanting to see how many pages it had. Before I could even try to open the book, we hear the loudest, deepest scream ever. And it wasn't clear either, it sounded super mucusy. It lasted for maybe 7 seconds and came from a little down the hall. Alexis and I dropped dead. She literally looked like she was going to faint then and there. I am getting goosebumps writing this. She sprinted away, being terrified. I dropped the Bible and ran with her. Before we could get into the living room, she is crying. We got to the door and she struggles for at least 5 seconds to get the screen door open. That was the longest 5 seconds of my life. I hadn't looked behind me the whole time. Looking back, I wish I had. She finally got it open and we book it to my grandparents' house. I wondered if it was my grandpa pranking us, but he was still there, calm as a tree, playing Hitman. He started freaking out. He found rashes all up our arms and necks. We didn't touch any of the plants. About 15 minutes later, I started calming down. Alexis was still panicky. Brooke came over because we hung out with her a lot. She asked what was going on. My grandpa and Brooke went to explore the house, found nothing. I, for some reason, wish I would just have went to find out what had emitted that noise of death. My guess is a demonic spirit. I think this because the scream happened as I picked up the Bible. That house still stands today. It was renovated and Brooke's uncle currently lives in it. I'm thinking of asking them about it sometime, don't want to scare them away though. Before that happened, I was real skeptical about ghosts. I am now a complete believer as I found out that my father's house is haunted and I live there. In fact, I am there as I am writing this. I get scared to look up from my phone to find someone looking back. Wouldn't be the first time that's has happened. I am home alone there a lot and regularly hear doors closing and cabinets opening and shutting. That is a story for another day. It was a random Thursday night in late September, early October of my sophomore year of college. My 3 roommates and I had some of our friends over to the townhouse we shared for a low-key night of drinking and board games. After a while, the conversation got on the topic of the paranormal and hauntings and stuff. The house I grew up in and my parents still occupied was haunted, so I was sharing some of the crazy stuff we experienced from my childhood. Others began telling crazy stuff they read online or they experienced themselves and whatnot. It was one of those semi-drunken, fun conversations you have in your early 20s that no one really takes seriously. There was one person who hadn't said a word since the topic of the paranormal had come up. My roommate Jay's girlfriend, Becca, not their real names, had been sitting in the corner of the sectional couch with a look of true fear plastered on her face, as if she had remembered something terrible. One of my other roommates asked her what was wrong. "I don't really like talking about this stuff," she replied. We asked her why. She at first was hesitant to get into it, but relented after some more pressing. Here's her story. When Becca was 10, her parents separated and her mom took her, her brother, 12, and younger sister, 5, to live in this old house that had once been occupied by an elderly couple who had recently passed. The kids did think it was creepy that the previous owners had died, but were reassured by their mom that the people didn't die in the house, but rather at a nursing facility a few miles away. Becca indicated this put her at ease and that nothing really happened for the first few months or so of them living there. But after a while, her little sister, who she shared a room with, started acting very, very strange. Becca would wake up in the night to see her sister frozen on all fours on her bed, staring at nothing. She would talk to her new imaginary friends and became increasingly agitated over the smallest stuff. She refused to eat and began growling and grunting at everyone, even in public. But according to Becca, by far the creepiest thing she started doing was singing Mr. Sandman by the Chordettes in this odd voice. Becca couldn't really explain the voice at the time, but assured us it was creepy. And this was all the time, like almost every second of every day. Becca said she'd wake up in the middle of the night with her sister on her bed, frozen on all fours, staring at nothing, singing Mr. Sandman in this strange voice. Their mother at first thought it was a phase and didn't really do much about it. This went on for months until one night Becca woke up to the sounds of her mom screaming. She looked over and her sister was not in her bed. She bolted to her door and crashed into her brother in the hallway. They looked down the hall to their mom's bedroom and the door was closed. As they started sprinting to the door, it opened and her little sister comes out laughing and talking to her imaginary friend. They barreled past her to their mom's room and asked her what happened. Their mother refused to tell them. All she was doing was crying and telling them to check on their sister. Neither of them wanted to because it was super creepy, so they just ended up sleeping in their mom's room that night. The little sister went back to her room, and the entire night was singing Mr. Sandman, loudly. The next morning, their dad came over to stay on the couch for a few days. Apparently, he had experienced something similar during one of his weekends with the kids, so he believed their mom. Ultimately, this led to her parents reconciling and the family moving back into their old house with their dad. As soon as they did that, the weird behavior stopped. Becca told us she can't hear the Mr. Sandman song without getting creeped out. We were floored. But then Becca went on to blow our minds further. She had proof of some of this at her home in her hometown, which was only an hour and a half away. Apparently, her little sister liked to record herself singing pop songs and stuff as a kid, and captured something super creepy shortly after they moved in. Becca decided to go home that weekend and get the tape. It was excruciating waiting until she got back Sunday. Sunday night, she came over with an old Talkboy tape recorder from Home Alone 2 and the tape. You had to listen with headphones because apparently it was pretty faint, so we had to take turns. When it became my turn, I couldn't believe it. The tape starts pretty innocuous. You hear a sink running and dishes clanking against one another. Someone is doing dishes. A woman softly begins humming. It sounds like the mother doing dishes humming to herself. The humming begins to shift into singing. Then it's Mr. Sandman. The woman's voice softly sings, "Mr. Sandman, bring me a drink." Then Becca's sister starts singing but is messing up the words. She then says, "Mommy, how does the Mr. Sandman song go?" A different woman's voice speaks. "Well, sweetheart, it goes, 'Mr. Sandman, bring me a drink.'" The original woman's voice is still singing at the same time. She then stops and states, "Earl, I think the little one can hear us." The tape then has all these weird growls and static noise and then cuts out. My dad lived most of his life in Cuba before coming to this U.S. At the age of 19, my dad was attending a school that was like a boarding university where he would stay there during the week and go back home on the weekend. My dad had a very strict math teacher who did not get along with. However, on one particular day during the end of the school year, he would make it even worse. On this day, my dad was sitting in class and the professor had the radio on blabbering about Fidel and the Communist Party. I guess my dad thought he was quite the jokester and decided to say some pretty offense things about the government. As many of you already know, Cuba is a communist country, and many people there who are brainwashed do not take any opposition of the government lightly, aka his professor. Anyways, you can imagine that his professor was extremely pissed. After hearing what my dad had said, she stormed up to him and told him that she would do everything in her power to not allow him to pass the final exam. Well, once my dad heard that, he knew that he had messed up badly, and for weeks after he tried his best to study. However, he knew it was no use. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. One of my dad's bunkmates had told my dad of a man that lived in the outskirts of the city that could help him. To put it simply, this man was like a shaman. My dad told me he went to the man's house that was far away from his school deep in the mountains. As he arrived, the man greeted my dad at the door warmly and invited him inside. Before my dad could even explain to the man why he was there, it was like he already knew. He told my dad everything that was going on and why he went to see him in the first place. He told my dad he would help and gave him a little bag that was filled with dried seeds and other things. I can't really remember. He told him that on the day of his exam to hold the bag in his hand and to not worry that he would pass the exam. Anyways, after that, on the day of the exam, he did exactly what the man said. He told me that he was flying through the exam and knew exactly what to put. To no surprise, just as the man had said, my dad was the only one in his class to pass the exam. Now this is where the story gets really interesting. A couple of weeks after this whole ordeal, my dad was off to see his friend who stayed a couple of miles away. He had left during the day, however, when he decided to return home it was already dark, maybe around 11 or 12. Knowing that he could get in lots of trouble if he was caught out of his dorm at this time, my dad decided to take a shortcut through some crop fields. As my dad was walking alone through the dark fields, he heard in the distance the sound of hooves of a horse. My dad rushed to hide behind the tall crops, fearing that it was an administrative from his school, a patrol officer, or even someone that would catch him where he wasn't supposed to be. As the sound got close, all of a sudden he sees the legs of the horse stop right in front of him. He immediately got up, accepting his defeat of being caught. However, to his surprise, it wasn't any of the three described above. It was the shaman who had helped him out months ago. My dad, in confusion and shock, quickly said hello to the man. However, all the man did was take off his hat as a sign of greeting and carried on his way. Relieved, my dad continued his way back to his dorm. Back at his dorm, my dad quickly woke up his bunkmate, telling him everything that had just happened. However, when my dad had told him who he had seen in the fields, a look of confusion crossed over his face. He asked, "Who did you see?" and my dad replied, "The shaman." Worried and confused, he told my dad, "You do know that he passed away a week ago, right?" Shocked, my dad decided that he would never cross those fields again.